Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you might be watching this. I am Brother Youssef, Dr. Wilfred Youssef Doucet. I am a member of the Joko, and I welcome you to this Joko conversation, though in truth, it's just me talking. And we aren't live, right? I'm recording this on Saturday, May 23rd. I'm ordinarily here with my partner Tasha, but I'm picking up where I left off last time, doing a solo act, as it were. And as we always do, and particularly Tasha when she's here, we always acknowledge and honor that we do this work, the work of the Joko, in the name of and in the tradition of, and picking up the torch from our ancestors, our personal ancestors from here in Southern California, Los Angeles, California, our families from Texas, from Arkansas, from Louisiana, occupied Turtle Island. And we specifically do this work at the hospitality of the Tongva people, the First Nations of this Southern California region where we are, what's now called the Los Angeles Basin, in the unceded lands of the Tongva people. I, again, am Youssef, a poet and a professor of composition, creative writing, and critical thinking, literature, with a background in the liberal arts, Black studies, Africana studies, with the humanities focus, composition studies, and cultural studies. All of that really coming together in my cultural studies work. And I wanted to pick up with the last discussion where I talked about my reasons for using The Handmaid's Tale in my classroom for years. And, oddly, I'm having this conversation now, but I haven't used The Handmaid's Tale for the first time in a very long time in this academic year, right? I replaced it this academic year with the Parable of the Sower, right? Octavia E. Butler's Parable of the Sower. Again, a book that wound up being predictive of the moment we're in, and uncannily so, even to the year in some ways, though there are extremes in the novel that aren't absolutely current, but certainly are precursors in this moment. Or that is, the moment we're living in is a precursor to some of the extremes that are in the Parable of the Sower. However, this is about The Handmaid's Tale. And, even though I decided not to teach it this year, to move on to a new text, I still wanted to keep talking about it. I felt like, there was more to say, more to add to the last recording that I made on it, the last episode, if you will, of the Joko conversations. And it's interesting. I've taught, as I mentioned in the last recording, I had taught Toni Morrison in this first year composition course as the standalone book length work that the students, read, unpack, um, work to understand, critically analyze and interpret. The and it was again, Toni Morrison Sula was very successful for a very long time. However, I was defining success when I was using it. The I've used Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man in the course also, but only for 1 year actually. And it was I mean, it was good. It was a good experience, but I felt I still, had a feeling of its relatability in that particular course to the present moment when I used it. That particular first year composition class was a dedicated class, dedicated to, it was a special program class, one of the special programs at Santa Monica College. So that course was a Black collegians course. And so the largest number of students in the class were members of the Black collegians program, which is open to all students regardless of background or any other, feature of their person or identity. And that was one of the reasons I selected it, because it was a Black collegians course. I decided to go with a classic of African American literature, and a novel that I had studied, written about, as a graduate student, following the same exercise that I do. Beginning with The Handmaid's Tale. And part of my evolution as a classroom teacher, as a college classroom teacher, turning the class around, as we say. Rather than me simply lecturing on the novel, I've always preferred the seminar style discussion of the text, right? Want to hear what the students have to say, encourage them to share their ideas with me, with each other. And so to facilitate that, that was the approach when I was teaching Sula. And it goes back to my own early college education at St. Mary's College in the integral curriculum. Well, that was the primary, mode of class work, right? Was seminar style discussion of the readings, and really across the various classes, but particularly in the class called seminar. So to facilitate that, what I began doing, and not just with Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, and then with Invisible Man, right? Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. I interrupted that effort to teach The Handmaid's Tale with Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things, at least once for this first year composition class, and Toni Morrison's Paradise. But often that was like just one semester that I did that out of, I don't know how many semesters since, again, well, you could count the semesters if you want to do the math, since probably 2003 or 4. So students are required, again, all the reading for this course, to select a reading that they want to review and present to the class. Developing 2 discussion questions from their selected reading. And students who select the novel are given chapters from the novel. I have my notes on the novel. I always have things that I want to share with the students. Any holes that I want to fill in case, and not even that they leave something out, but if they're focusing on this one thing, and if I have my own notes that if they didn't cover what is in my notes, I'll get that into the conversation, right? But the turning around of the classroom so that the students engage the readings in an active way, and are encouraged to think critically about it to produce discussion generating questions, right? As Tasha would say, generative questions, rather than objective yes or no, true or false type questions. And I clarify that with them. You're not quizzing the class on whether they read the text or not. We're going to assume everyone read it and are there to discuss it, right? So what questions can you generate to get that discussion going? And then each student meets with me before their presentation of either the essay, the video, or their chapters from the novel that they're going to present, right? And that ends up requiring, or what ends up happening is this really breakdown of chapter by chapter of the novel as we go through it over like a 2.5-week period. I guess 3 weeks altogether. You count the way I do it. A class that meets twice a week. Second meeting of the week of week 5, it's introduced. Week 6 and 7, we discuss it. First meeting of week 8, final discussion. And then they write their essay on it, right? So anyway, giving you a peek into my classroom, right? Particularly around the midterm of the first year composition semester. But what about this novel? Just again, detail that I left out, why I found it so predictive. What about it did the classes, did my students and I see coming to fruition? The way the novel, the way the story is told, in this first person narration, right? The handmaid, who never gives her name. Again, I know this is a difference from the Hulu series. It's possible to narrow down her possible name as names are introduced at the end of the very short opening chapter. And we know among the women she introduces in that opening chapter who she can't be, because those characters show up in the narrative as not her, right? As she's identifying them, interacting with them. So it does leave a couple of possibilities, and one can kind of figure it out. But the point is, she never actually gives her name, her given name, right? The name her mother gives her is never shared in this novel. And I think that's, there's a certain effect to that, right? As I mentioned in the last recording. Spoiler alerts, right? We learn that these recordings that she's making are clandestine. And so not revealing her name is part of protecting her identity and the clandestine character of what she's doing. So she's only known as Alfred or of Fred in the novel. And that's important, right? Again, emphasizing the way in which she is owned by the commander. and leaning into the underground aspect of these tapes that we have been listening to at this conference that we discover in the final chapter. This dystopian novel, right? Margaret Atwood looking at the world in the early 1980s and asking the question, what if? What if a far right wing Christian nationalist, white Christian nationalist fundamentalist movement engineered a coup in the United States? And that question is answered in this nonlinear journal like narrative that when it opens, we're already in the middle of things, right? Our narrator, our unnamed narrator, is in what we learn later is the Red Center, this repurposed high school that has now become a re-education center for the still fertile women who will become handmaids, their handmaid training, and how they are all the hints at major themes that are going to emerge in the novel, the function of memory being introduced, the how should I say, the vicissitudes of desire, right? And the, the yearning for a future and getting a future that is nothing like what one wanted, what one yearned for. But that sense of expectation associated with high school and a different kind of expectation now in the Red Center, where the women are infantilized, dehumanized, right? All of this is introduced in this first chapter, and quite subtly, the dehumanization of the women, the silencing of the women, and the way in which they are already subverting that, fighting back, learning to lip read so that they can know each other's names. This in medias res opening, right? We're in the middle of it. And through this nonlinear journal-like exploration narrative by our narrator Offred, whose name Offred is eventually introduced. You know, we get the scene of a biblical law, still capitalist, shrunken world, militarized world of reasserted, reinvigorated, biblically modeled patriarchy, where even the women who advocated for this world, particularly embodied in the wife, Serena Joy, who lived lives in the public sphere, now shrunken, right? All the kind of shrinkage of, and really everyone, because the novel also explores the way in which the commander's life is shrunken, the way the lives of non-elite men are shrunken, that the trade for security and order over freedom is a fool's bargain. The everyone has their uniform, right? And color coded. Cold, cool blue for the wives. The hot, signaling, highly visible color of blood and life, handmaids. The earth colors of the Marthas in their green and the aunts in their brown and khaki, the commanders in their black uniforms, evoking the black shirts, right, of fascist Italy. And it is a Christo-Fascist world that is the Republic of Gilead. It is a surveillance state, and a surveillance state, a Christo-Fascist surveillance state in which mainline Christian denominations are outlaws. So it is such an extreme form, right, that it can't abide other forms. There are scenes in the novel of Catholic priests hanging from the wall, and the wall is a site of public punishment, public display of the power of the state over life and death. In the novel, a place where Catholic priests are hung. Jews who refuse to convert are hung. Doctors accused of committing or performing abortions are hung, etc. The there is a war against the Baptist, or the Baptists are in armed struggle against the Gilead state. So, one gets the sense early on of the extremity, right? The fanaticism of whatever this formation is in Gilead. And we do find out what I think are they the sons of Jacob? Maybe they call themselves this Christo-Fascist organization that engineers this coup in the United States to bring a theocratic, hierarchical, illiberal, fascistic state to North America. And our narrator is limited, right? So she only knows so much about everything going on, right? We know that oranges still come in to where they are, which is in Massachusetts, and actually I think in the Boston or Cambridge area, there are clues, right, to Harvard being nearby. We know oranges still come in from California. We know that, as I mentioned in the last episode, in terms of looking at how the novel exposes the racial politics of the Christo-Fascist movement, right? That it is white Christian nationalism, white Christian fascism. That Detroit is being bombed. Canada is a refuge. for those who can get across the border, right? Within the novel, uh, there are various historical allusions to 20th century and before atrocities, direct references to periods of enslavement in the United States, to the uses of reservations and Bantustans, homelands, the uh, uh, the implication that the quote unquote children of Ham being rounded up um, and supposedly taken to these new homelands, but no one really knows for sure where people are going, if they're going anywhere, at all. The supposedly being resettled, right? So Gilead is this racial state. And a lot of what we get, our narrator gets in bits and pieces when at the beginning of the ceremony, and they gather in the I forget the specific room, the sitting room, I guess, something like that, right? And Serena Joy allows them to watch television while they wait for the commander, and our narrator gleans as much as she can from the news, among other things, knowing that there is a Montreal satellite station whose signal is blocked because the regime is controlling all information as best they can. I call it predictive. And the way in which my students and I, watched it happen over time, and in some ways participated in it, right? And so far as, students, some of, students often belong sometimes to these mega churches, or even, smaller churches that are at least Christian nationalist adjacent, or share the same distrust of liberalism that has been such and liberalism, small L, kind of and sort of writ large, beyond any particular uh, uh, national party here in the United States that represents, liberalism versus conservatism, some form of the left of center versus the right of center. And, we're very clear that in the United States, what is considered the liberal left is center and even conservative in many and most other countries. But liberalism, writ large, right? That the liberalism that emerges out of the Enlightenment moment, the political revolutions, the bourgeois revolution of the late 18th century and early 19th century and through the 19th century, right? The efforts to democratize power, remove the power of aristocracy, put power in the hands of elected legislators, chief executives, prime ministers, the fundamental workings of parliamentary systems, in primarily the Republican form or some version of the constitutional monarchy, right? Liberalism writ large in that way. That is a challenge to hierarchy, and certainly historically, a challenge to the power of the church, whether the church is central to power, or adjacent to power, or a partner in power with the state, right? Part of the, I'm sorry, what a state was the church in pre-revolutionary France, but you get my point. And these religious rooted movements, the Christian nationalist, the white Christian nationalist, and all the various versions of it are unified in their opposition to liberalism, right? And the novel captures this quite well, right? I think it gets really to the heart of it. This is explored through the various forms of corruption that this surveillance, hierarchical, patriarchal, still capitalist system within the novel, The Republic of Gilead, through the corruption it breeds and the privilege that the elite take, right, as the commander in the household initiates these clandestine meetings with our narrator in his study to play Scrabble for companionship. Yeah, just that, right? For companionship. Though, yeah, there's more to it eventually, but primarily for companionship, as one, the readers can, again, also get a sense in the way in which the system also shrinks his life. But he has access, right, to all of the various kinds of contraband. Women are and particularly the handmaids, aren't allowed to read. He provides magazines for our narrator. He provides lotion for her. The handmaids aren't there to avoid all forms of vanity, right? So they're not given, these kinds of toiletries. Serena Joy, right, has access to real coffee, to cigarettes, in her own side deals with our narrator. She's offering cigarettes. So corruption is bred, right, in this tightly controlled, surveilled, top-down, militarized system. And there is the same disdain as expressed by the commander in their conversations for the kind of world that the liberal order created. Particularly in terms of the social mobility of women in the society, the problem of women not being dependent on men, the sort of these complaints that men had nothing to do, et cetera, right? And that the problem with the liberal order can really be summed up in this statement, I think, from Aunt Lydia. And I'm guessing Aunt Lydia. Yeah, I do think it was Aunt Lydia at the Red Center. In the old times, that is, in the time of the liberal state, right, small L, whether governed by conservatives or whatever passes as the liberal or left party, people had freedom to. Now, under the Republic of Gilead, they have freedom from. Leaning into the notions of security and order. And one of the questions that comes up in the classroom, is there a such thing as too much democracy, too much freedom? Not talking about license, right? But is there a such thing as power distributed, too much of power distributed equally rather than top down? So this freedom to being a problem, right? And a declaration of I have a right to, but rather freedom from, and the froms are not from the abuses of the state or power, but always framed in terms of insecurity, freedom from fear and of the other, because the other is so totally controlled or eliminated. That same disdain for liberalism, for the liberal state, for the liberal order, for the move toward a more genuine and internalized sense of the democratic and the social and the communal. The is absolutely shared by the forces of Christian nationalism in this country, which has ascended to power, is adjacent to power at the very least, after decades of dedicated organizing on many, many levels, but in multiple Christian faces, you might say, multiple church and or denominational affiliations who share the disdain for the liberal order. And want to go back to a more hierarchical authoritative, hierarchical, top-down type system. I just, I watched a recent video that identified 3 of the major streams. So, something that, again, in the novel, the framers, rulers, the elite of the Republic of Gilead are vehemently anti-Catholic, likely also anti-Eastern Orthodox, or what's called Oriental Orthodox, also, which refers to the traditional churches of Africa, East Africa in particular, and Western Asia. The Ethiopian Tewahedo Church, the Egyptian Coptic Orthodox Church, the Armenian Church, the Syrian Church, and others, right? I think the the Thomas Church, Syrian Orthodox in India, the which are also high church, right? Like the Catholic Church. The Despite these doctrinal and theological differences, they share. I'm sorry. A recent discussion on culture, faith, and politics YouTube channel. There's a discussion on three of the major streams of Christian nationalism in this country, that even though they have severe theological differences and often don't really like each other, they agree on their rejection of liberalism and the liberal democratic state, or that it should at least in some ways be mitigated. One group identified as and I need to find out who I'm talking about, right? I just feel like, I want to give them, their propers. Culture, faith, and politics is the YouTube channel you want to go to, where there's a discussion. Three groups built MAGA Christianity, and they all want different things, which speaks to those different theologies, right? The Catholic the Catholic integrationalist, the Reformed evangelicals, and the Pentecostal New Apostolic Restoration are as the primary groups, and it's again not just those three, but as these primary groups who have some version of dismantling the liberal order and replacing it with a theocratic state that smashes any wall that may exist between the functions of the church and the functions of the state. They are in effect, and it really is this simple, right? In the way in which Iran is the Islamic Republic of Iran, they do want this to be the Christian Republic of the United States. That is the goal, and it has been reported. He has said openly. The pastor of the church denomination that Pete Hegseth is a member of, wants to see something like Jesus Christ as Lord put into the Constitution, right? To make it that sort of thing. I wonder if something is not letting me do something, and I'm not sure why that is. Well, we'll find out in a moment. So I'm not going to worry about that yet. Okay. So anyway, I've already been talking for like 45 minutes. I hope I haven't bored you. Then you have the Reformed evangelicals, right? So the Catholic integrationalists who, want to put the state at the service of the church, and it's really explained well in the video. The channel Culture, Faith, and Politics, and the title of the episode, Three Groups Built MAGA Christianity, and They All Want Different Things. I would put that in the chat or something, but I don't seem to be able to for some reason, and I'm not really sure. So I said it a couple of times. Hopefully that helps. If you put on the closed caption, you'll see it in writing. I'll say it one more time. The channel is Culture, Faith, and Politics, and the particular episode, 3 groups built MAGA Christianity, and they all want different things. And I do recommend Culture, Faith, and Politics. Pat Kankey or Pat Kankey is it's his channel, right? And I believe he's a former minister, though I'm not completely positive about that. But I do recommend the channel if you are interested in these intersections of religion and politics, faith communities and politics, because they do intersect, and they always do intersect. Well, I'll just leave it there for now. And then the Reformed evangelicals, right? They see a time to these are the dominionists, right? Who want to create a new Christendom, for whom the whole world actually needs to be converted so that Jesus may return. This is the theology that informs Pete Hegseth's worldview. And maybe all 3 of these groups are, but certainly these Reformed evangelicals who have some relation to Calvinism, which is fundamental to American ideologies, U.S. American ideologies of who deserves and who doesn't deserve, who is worthy, and these ideas of predestination. But they are very openly and vigorously, calling for the repeal of the 19th Amendment that gives women the vote, and calling for household voting, where the male head of the household votes for the entire household. This is essentially the household of the commander. And an ongoing motif in The Handmaid's Tale is the Roman motif. There's a Latin phrase that's been carved into her closet. We learned that the commander was a student of Latin, and indeed the commander acts as the paterfamilias, with the power of life and death over his household. Both his wife, the children that don't exist under Roman law, or here, they don't have any children, and over his servants, basically, who in this case would be the Marthas, Offred the handmaid, and also Nick the chauffeur. I haven't talked about the resistance in the novel, and there is resistance, and we're coming up on an hour, so I don't want to keep going on and on. So maybe I'll do one more on the forms of resistance, but there are, because repression reduces or produces resistance. The third group, right, who come from the Pentecostal tradition, the New Apostolic Restoration, and these are the folks who are associated with the Seven Mountains Mandate, right, that the church, the Christian church, and specifically their church, should control all the various important sectors of society. Let's see. What are the 7 mountains? And yeah, I don't have them off the top of my head, but I know how to look things up. So let's see. What are the 7 areas that should be dominated? Family, religion, education, media, arts and entertainment, business, and government. That all of these should be churched effectively, right? Or and that Christians and a particular kind of Christian, right? Um, and a particular kind of Christian theology and walk and form of organization um, should be in charge of and construct and be the manner of doing of all these areas, right? A Christian family with the father as the head and authority. Um, the Christian religion, elevated education being in the content of education being a particular kind of Christianity, one that does not accept science or the science that contradicts their reading of scripture. And that part, right? That contradicts their reading of scripture. Because these are minority positions. I mean, you take the Catholic integrationalist, there are what, 1 billion Catholics in the world, and there are so many strains and approaches that these are minority positions, but they are minority positions that have found their way into power and adjacent to power. The new apostolic restoration is in the White House, is in the current presidential regime, in the person of Paula White and those who adhere to her brand of Pentecostal Christianity. Though the Reformed evangelical strain, it is in charge of the most powerful and best funded military in the world. And though its shortcomings are being exposed by the Iranians, that does not, in and of itself, mitigate the kinds of destruction that this military can bring. And that's Pete Hegseth, right? The Reformed evangelical, right there in power. And then the Catholic integrationalists, you have the folks like the vice president, the Secretary of State, the how many members of the Supreme Court are these conservative Catholics? I'm not sure. I'm not sure which brand of these the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, fits into. He may not be Reformed evangelical or Pentecostal, but he's a Christian nationalist and he belongs to one of these conservative churches. So that's why we called it predictive, and we felt like we could see it happen because when I began teaching it during the George W. Bush presidency, this is when that, what is it? The Faith Initiatives Office was put into the White House, and a big part of his appeal and the part of the way he would run and that politicians have been running very openly, especially Republicans, but not exclusively Republicans. How often do and have politicians in the United States been evoking God in their speeches, in their campaigns, campaign ads, etc. And this has been going on since the 80s, which is what Margaret Atwood was responding to and looking to explore and expose. And that only continued to intensify in the 90s. So much of the backlash against the Clintons, who again, the Democratic Party hasn't run a genuine progressive. FDR, I mean, a genuine progressive. I don't know if Adlai Stevenson was a genuine progressive. Can we even say that about the Kennedys? I guess maybe, and maybe 68. Yeah, that someone would take seriously, though, or that the Democratic National Committee hasn't undermined. Right? Wasn't Eugene McCarthy undermined in the 68 campaign? Well, you get the point, right? You get the point. The language of religion has been such a salient part of politics in the United States, especially since the 1980s and the Reagan counter-revolution. There has been a steady march to this point where we are right now. And Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale could see that coming. Margaret Atwood could see that coming. And she found this very accessible way to explore what that would look like, right? To speculate, right? And the novel has been described as speculative fiction. To speculate on what that would look like through the eyes of an individual, a woman with a child, with a degree, who had a job, who was raised by a feminist with whom she had a complicated relationship, because relationships between parents and children are complicated. Who is now essentially the sex slave of the commander and that household in their effort to slow the zero birth rate of white people in this near future now. And the character Offred within this world is still able to exhibit an understanding and a compassion even for Serena Joy, who she hates and has reason to hate, but is still able to wonder whether the ceremony in which Serena Joy is present, in which she has to lay between Serena Joy's legs while the commander does his business, and pleasure is not the point, everyone's doing their duty, she can't help but wonder, is it worse for her, for Serena Joy, than it is for Offred herself? She's, and Margaret Atwood is able to portray, the depth of that humanity, the way in which she struggles with boredom, waiting around basically for the ceremony, the way in which she and the Marthas are not able to really form a friendship because that's discouraged. The way in which, again, Serena Joy's life has shrunk to basically her household and her garden, etc. So I highly recommend it. One of the interesting things to me right now is because the Christian nationalists, who are, again, continuing to work really hard to make this a theocratic republic in their image, because there are so many disparate strains of Christian nationalism who can agree on their hatred for liberalism, hatred for the modern secular state, hatred for secular humanism, distrust of democracy, and desire for a religiously informed hierarchy that reinstitutes maybe even a kind of new aristocracy and a neo-feudalism. How long before what the founders and framers of this country, with all of their horrible flaws, and nobody's off the hook, but they did have the memory of the religious wars in Europe, and the way that those religious wars had made their way to the various colonies, as we know, as many of these Christian nationalists want to point out. So many of the colonies were founded as religious refuge. We know the story of the Pilgrims, right? However much these things have been romanticized, but we do know the story of the Pilgrims. And there was a religious aspect to them wanting to colonize where they're colonized, and their notions of the promised land. Although, it's questionable how much they were persecuted as to how much they were persecuting others, or just, making life difficult for others who weren't Puritan. Anyway, I'm saying too much there. Or getting off topic. The point is, you have what is it, Rhode Island, founded by folks who leave the Massachusetts Bay Colony for religious reasons. Maryland, founded as a Catholic refuge. You've got in Pennsylvania, you've got a place for the Quakers, for Mennonites and Amish, etc. Right? The Anabaptist, etc. So these framers, these founders, were, the religious wars would be fresh enough memories for them, right? The centuries of bloodshed in Europe over Catholicism and Protestantism, to say nothing of both the Catholics and the Protestants attacking the indigenous religions of Europe, or the indigenous lifeways of Europe. So they had the good sense, right, to at least write that into the Constitution or into the First Amendment, and the no establishment of religion, right? So that's what they hate. That's what they want to change, and part of that is changing and asserting the narrative of the founding, right? In this, as they are celebrating the 250 years of the settler colony, they just had this big revival thing, the so-called rededication of a country that had never been dedicated, other than privately by religious organizations in this effort, right, to make it a state, a function of the state. The Handmaid's Tale saw that coming in the early mid 80s. What was it, 84 or 85 that the novel might have first come out? I don't have my copy here where I am. It's in my office at Santa Monica College. Otherwise, I'd look. Anyway, I hope this was interesting. I mean, there's a lot more I could say. But I'm not trying to go through the novel chapter by chapter with you. That would be a whole series that, quite frankly, I don't really have time for because there's so many other things that we want to look at and we want to share as the Joko, right? I mean, there are a bunch of things that are introduced in that novel, all kinds of themes, these major concepts, human experiences, that I'm asking my students to look for, that they are going to, that will be the content of their essay. And there are multiple themes, it looks at sex, the experiences of loneliness, expectation, what happens to a society that is childless or that recognizes that it is not reproducing itself, it is not procreating. These issues of what does freedom mean? Is it freedom to or freedom from that matters? People dealing with betrayal, with a sense of betrayal and survivor's guilt, as Offred is thinking about her husband Luke and where he is, where's her daughter, where's her mother, where's her friend Moira. How she didn't have much of a choice, but she did have a choice, and she made this choice. And students often want to dispute that, but I take her at her word, right? She says she made a choice, and she recognizes it wasn't much of a choice, but it was a choice. And I think it's important to honor her agency, right? To recognize her agency. But what comes with that is her sense of, how do I allow this to become normal? That's betraying the people I love. It looks at how people deal with trauma, right? The way in which disembodiment is a defense, against this. Against abuse, against the trauma of the experience. How does one keep hope? How does one fight against hopelessness? And this is an ongoing battle for the narrator, right? Such to the point that it can that hopelessness can lead to recklessness, right? There's an exploration of how these folks come to power, how they engineer a coup, how they blame it on Muslims, and how, because everyone is shocked, they're allowed to bit by bit take away folks' rights. There's exploration of how we make excuses. As the narrator takes the time to remember a documentary she saw that is interviewing the mistress of a Nazi war criminal, and she remembers the mistress saying he was not a monster, and how the mistress's ability to humanize the war criminal, and what makes that necessary, right? What makes it necessary to humanize, to invent humanities for people who are doing inhumane things. and how easily the narrator can fall into that with her in her relationship with the commander. Um, Being able to recognize his humanity, but also, being susceptible to that trap of allowing that recognition to excuse his inhumane acts and the inhumane structure of the society. Um, she takes the time to talk about how these people came to power, how they engineered the coup, how the step-by-step taking away of rights, how she remembers the day when she and other women working for the library where she worked, digitizing material, are asked to leave their job, and how there was a sense of guilt among them, even though they knew they had done nothing wrong. Why do they feel this guilt? And what does that have to do with the cultural conditioning that has been with us since the Bronze Age? That thing that makes it unusual, or at least makes us think it's unusual, that women are in the workplace, that women are in the public sphere, when women have always been in some way, always, well, absolutely always in the workspace, in the um, always working at home, outside the home, um, and at least elite women some way in the public sphere, but there's this sense that they don't belong. So even though these women know they've done nothing wrong, they can't help feeling a sense of guilt for having been at work and now being let go and sort of called out for having been at work. So it looks at cultural conditioning and how old and how deep that cultural conditioning goes. That should, be the case, that they should feel that way. Again, we get to look at the themes of time, the passage of time, memory. The nonlinear aspect of the novel is part of how it explores time, how it explores desire, the desire to live, the desire to love, the desire to be held, the desire to transgress, the desire to take control of something when everything else is controlled. And so the willingness to break rules, to join the underground, to take the deal, with the commander, to take the deal with Serena Joy, to use that to one's own advantage. So the novel is doing a lot. I wanted to talk about it, starting with the previous video, specifically because of again, what it says about the racist ideology of these Christian nationalist movements. Something that was changed for the Hulu series for whatever their reasons were, but that I think is really important and effective in the novel. But it's not only that, right? Because again, the white nationalism, the fear of replacement, the concern about white birth rates, all of that is a really important aspect of the novel. And it loses something, I think, to lose that. Margaret Atwood was saying something really important about what she saw happening and what we are now living through. It has not become The Handmaid's Tale exactly yet. So there's still time to fight, right? There's still time to keep it from becoming that. Here again, though, an example of what literature can do and why books like The Handmaid's Tale, like works by Toni Morrison, like works by Arundhati Roy, like works by Ralph Ellison, get banned. This is why they get banned. This is why there's an attack on the humanities, because the humanities and humanities courses require students to think and to think about big ideas, to approach questions that have no easy answers. So you got to think critically about them, gather information to inform your thinking and what you know and what you understand. And this is why these theocrats, reactionaries, fascists, Christo-Fascist, have systematically dismantled public education, made higher education truly unaffordable, and are doing everything they can to control school curriculums, etc. So I highly recommend reading Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. And don't make the mistake I made the very first time I read it, where I thought historical notes was some commentary from a scholar about the novel, like an afterword. So I decided not to read it. The second time I read the novel, I said, well, let me see what the scholar has to say. And I realized, that's the actual last chapter of the novel. The first time I read it, I didn't finish the novel. I finished Offred's story, but I didn't finish the novel. So don't make the mistake I made. Thank you. I hope you find this interesting. It was fun to do, especially since I'm not teaching the book in class anymore. So it gave me a chance to talk about the book again. Please do the things that we need you to do at the Joko Collective channel. Please subscribe. That helps us, right? Please subscribe, join our community. It grows little by little. Please like this video. It's really important. Help us overcome the tyranny of the algorithm. And by all means, share. Let folks know, and please share. So thank you. I am Youssef, Dr. W. Youssef Doucet, a member of the Joko, a teacher of composition, creative writing, and literature, critical thinking, Africana studies. I thank you for your attention. Really appreciate you. You know what Tasha and I never do? We never put our information we have an Instagram, the Joko Collective Instagram. I have my own Instagram at w.youssefdoucet, all one word, at w.youssefdoucet on Instagram. We have a website, jokocollective.org. And I have my own website, Free Ignace. That's FreeIgnace, freeignace.blog. And maybe I'll remember to do the stuff that normal people do, right? Put all of that in, because this is going to be posted on YouTube. So put all of that in the YouTube below, right, where you can, put your information. By all means, if you have a comment, please comment. Thank you for your attention. Let me close the way I like to close, quoting Bob Marley from the Natty Dread album. The song is Revolution, revelation reveals the truth. It takes a revolution to make a solution. Let's make a revolution, y'all.